Hi, my name is Scott Butler. I was the lead artist on Croc, Legend of the Gobbos. I was at Argonaut Software for 7.5 years. Yeah, I was on Croc for the entire duration. So I'd worked on a number of games before then, including FX Fighter, Creature Shock. There was a game that never got released, originally called Demolition Dam, which got renamed to Nucleus. Ren and Stimpy as well. King Arthur's World. There's just so many games we worked on. It was a really fun time. Croc started for me in '95, about 5 years into my employment. And my first memories of Croc are being asked to come work on it once FX Fighter wrapped up, and to join as lead artist and to run the team. One of the first meetings we had was what would the collectibles be, which eventually became the crystals in the game. And another one was what would be the objects that we would have to have Croc jump really high, which eventually became the jelly. It was already a crocodile at that point. I believe they'd gone through some exploration of different creatures for the main character. Yeah, my memory of the Gobbos was that to me they're just like pom-poms. It kind of made me laugh. They were very cute and fluffy. They're very friendly, very sweet looking, and you kind of want to save them. I think Simon Keating had already done a lot of designs by the point I joined. There was kind of a number of concepts that were there. So there was already sort of like a base of what they wanted for the main game. The process of creating the characters that Simon Keating was concepting, from what I saw, it was very, very free. We tried not to set a ceiling with him. We wouldn't sort of say, oh, don't create a character with, 8 tentacles or something, right? I'm just making things up, but as an example. But we never like to set a ceiling. And myself as a lead artist, who would always be overseeing concept through the process of 3D modeling and then animation and rigging and getting the character into game. I never liked, and I still do that today. I don't like to set hard ceilings on things. If it's a really good idea and it really adds to the game, then I think it's worth doing. And I think that's how you break new ground. If you sort of say every character can only be 2 legs, 2 arms, and a head, and it can only use so many polygons, and it can only do so much, then what you end up with is everything looking very similar. Already when I joined on the team on Croc, Simon had already created quite an array of characters that I loved. I mean, they all had a whimsical charm, and they all were fun and sort of cute and weird at the same time. So there were so many to choose from. And, I definitely was sort of probably grabbing from the earlier concepts and saying, hey, that character that you did, let's make that the boss, and let's do that, let's do something with that. But yeah, the process of new stuff was like, Simon, we need a new character. We need a new enemy, an enemy that runs really fast around the environment, and don't worry about, how we're going to do it. We'll just figure it out, And then he would sort of create a character that was like this crazy running speedy character. And it was like, all right, I'm going to create a trail thing that's just basically a transparent card with a blur on it. So it looks like it's, got motion blur. It's zooming along, but it's obviously, not motion blur as we know it today. So Simon was constantly drawing stuff. I think almost every day he came out with like at least a few designs, It was almost a bit dizzying sometimes, because obviously, as fast as he could draw something, he could draw another thing, 10 minutes later, but it takes us, days, weeks to get that implemented, So, there was always that kind of sort of issue with like, wow, all right, slow down a bit. This is a lot to choose from, One of the big tasks that I had to do joining the team was to figure out how we were going to put the world together. Initially, we weren't too sure what the PlayStation 1 could do, because it was for us, a new development kit. It was a new platform. And we weren't sure if we were going to make it sort of like a trench style game, a bit like other games that have come out around that time, like the launch, because then you're focusing all the rendering on sort of a fixed area sort of ahead of you, which can definitely be very performant. And we did that initially. We sort of had like a tunnel kind of environment where you sort of race through and collect stuff. But as we were experimenting, we got a Croc on screen running, on the spot. And then we realized that was running at 60 FPS, which was amazing. And it also was using a bit of skinning. The neck down to the tail and the legs was skinned. And then the arms and the head were parented objects, I believe. I should remember that because I did build him. And yeah, we then put loads more Crocs on screen. I think we had something like 30, 40, 50 Crocs, and it was like, wow, this platform's actually really powerful. So then we started exploring the idea of having more open environments, bigger environments. And we tried an arena, and I came up with a way to do environments that were very efficient and very editable. So I came up with a tiling system of corners, inverse corners, straights, blending from, grass to another terrain and back and forth, and sort of drop-offs and rivers and, things like that, and little cliffs and stuff. So that's when we started to realize that actually we can render something quite substantial. Yeah, well, once we had a lot of stuff running on screen, and we started exploring arenas. The arenas were basically enclosed, right? We eventually got doors and things and stuff like that to sort of extra areas, but we thought, can we render, like, I don't know, sort of 16 by 16 tiles? Can we go a bit further? How much can we render? I know the PlayStation was one of the first things that had sort of built-in hardware fogging into the rendering system. So we experimented that a little bit. We sort of pushed a little hard and fast, sort of expanding and expanding. We were constantly adding stuff, and because it was at the conceptual stage, it was early stages of having stuff built, getting the Croc built, getting some enemies built, getting some pickup objects and crates and things like that built. I did the crystals. I did that in 3D Studio and rendered it out spinning around with multiple lights on it as little sprites. And then getting that sort of sprite engine working, so you can have things that look like they're quite polygonal, got a lot of 3D in them, but they're actually a sprite scaling as you move around. We realized that yeah, we can do quite a lot with this platform. We could get particle effects, we could get scrolling textures for like lava and water and things like that. Thinking back to like how that was 27 years ago or 29 years ago when we started in 95. It was pretty, I felt like it was pretty groundbreaking at the time. There were definitely PS1 games that was coming out after that had, pretty big environments, but I feel like we were one of the first. It was really exciting. It was a really great, exploratory game to work on with, a new platform. We'd done 3D games before it, with FX Fighter and some other games, but this was the first time we had a system that by default in its rendering engine could do so much. The platform was so powerful. It was kind of quite eye-opening, how we started out with what we thought we could do, given sort of limitations of earlier games like FX Fighter. We had sort of probably something like 80 polygons per character to 100 polygons per character. And now being able to do, real-time skinning on Croc and so much 3D in the world, it was I would say it was probably at least 5 to 10x of what we initially thought we could do. I think the early process, and actually I think it continued on some way, was very open and free. I think Jez really trusted us to make something. We all had experience, a fair amount of experience in making games, and if there were sort of hard and fast deadlines, I wasn't too aware of it. I think he kind of tried to keep us creative, and sort of put the door was often closed. We're kind of locked in there almost, if you like. I think, at least in my opinion, what I felt like was that our process was like, if we took one of our favorite 2D platformers, which does have a, defined environment, right? You sort of come in here, you go through a bunch of stuff, you come out the other side into the next level, right? What if we kind of took that and then expanded it out this way, right, into a 3D area? And that sort of freedom to create and explore and to figure out what would platforming feel like in 3 dimensions. It wasn't the first 3D platformer, but it was certainly, I think, one of the first platformers to do it the way we did it, which was to really, concentrate on exploration in the game, jumping onto platforms and having platforms move around in 3D. Some of them were going back and forth, and is that easy to jump on? Are you going to miss it? You're going to have problems with perception of depth to landing on things. How does it feel to like jump on a crate and smash it? What with your camera movement, are you able to sort of look around and get a feel for the environment and really kind of feel like you're sort of in there and exploring? And it was wonderful, and I felt like the freedom that we had to create and do that was amazing. in Simon Keating's Croc concepts, there are a lot of ideas that were just never put into Croc, but he was exploring on that side. He was sort of, coming up with ideas and things with visual concepts of like how something might look, and crazy characters and interesting puzzles and elements that you could have. And it was just so much fun to create it. The PlayStation, we always felt like kept up, kept up with what we were throwing in there, and it was quite amazing. Yeah, we had a lot of fun doing stuff like that. I mean, even the iterative process of coming up with ways to do things visually on screen that we really couldn't do back in the day in the 90s, as we know it now. I'll give you an example, like the ice bosses with the sort of ice yetis, on the ice rink that had like a mountains and a fence around it. I remember saying to the team, it would be really fun if we could do reflections. Now, when you think like now, 2024 reflections, it's ray tracing, it's very sort of hardcore rendering engine stuff to do that. And the team just looked at me like I was crazy, and I says, no, let's grab the environment, all the fences, the mountains and everything, and then let's create a copy of that. Let's de-res it, lower resolution. Let's flip it upside down, tint it all blue with the textures, and then place that underneath the environment. And then instead of having transparency for the ice, the characters running around on, which is very, very expensive on the PlayStation, what we'll do is we'll just create little patches of scratches. Patches of scratches, kind of strange. Sounds very Dr. Seuss. But little kind of like areas of like sort of little details and things that we could copy around, so that the amount of actual rendering on the fill rate of that was very, very minimal. But it gave the sense that there was a flaw. I don't know what the number was, but I would say like a 20% cost, because we had a bit of extra environment. But because the environment itself around the arena was quite simple compared to some of the other ones, we had sort of that cost, already in there. So it was okay. We couldn't render the characters upside down. I mean, technically we could, but it would have been too many characters on screen. So we didn't really have the Yetis and Croc upside down underneath, unfortunately. But, for PS1 and for early players, you sort of kind of use your imagination and block that in. I feel working at Argonaut, the culture that we had was very sort of sandbox fun. We were all very young, so it was all very early discovery for us. It was, we were big games players. We've been playing games for years. But the way the culture worked at Argonaut, although we were always sort of, having to get games out and make stuff and get deals with publishers, and, because we were just a developer, was always that sort of that little bit of pressure. But I always felt like, even with all that, we felt the company culture was always allowing us to have fun and to make stuff. I just think also mixed in with that time period of, the 90s that I was there from like 90 to 97. It was just a fun time, because that was around when 3D was starting to kind of get off the ground. We'd had 3D games prior to that, some early filled 3D games on the Amiga, obviously wireframe games before that, sort of vector graphics. But we were starting to do stuff that was really kind of catching the eye of not only the players but the industry. Having textured 3D, having more stuff on screen than a lot of other developers were doing, and it was just exciting. It was just a fun time of both software and hardware kind of movement forward, and seeing new things to us that we hadn't necessarily really gotten to see before. It was really, really exciting.